what ifs in Sri Lanka cricket. What if we didn't lose our two weapons of our bowling attack during a haphazardly organized LPL? What if we capitalized on our good start against Australia? What if Madhushanka and Pathum didn't fumble that opportunity in the deep to dismiss Abdullah Shafiq? And what if, for once, we didn't have a middle order collapse to worry about? Oh well, that's SLC, a never ending love affair with the notion of what ifs. And with that build up, we welcome you to this very special episode of the Are You on Cricket. We are honored to have Mark Machado with us, a highly reputed journalist, producer, and broadcaster. Mark featured regularly on the BBC London 94.9 FM in the early breakfast with Harriet Scott. Mark is also the founder and host of the Murali Pod, with amazing episodes like the one we saw yesterday covering the Australia game on the Murali end. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's a real privilege and honour to be here. I mean, above all those things, first and foremost, I'm a fan of Sri Lanka cricket, and I want to see the boys do and the girls do as well as they can. And I love any opportunity to talk about it above all else, right? For me, that's the thing that gives me, I don't want to say the greatest joy because I've got family and stuff, but it gives me a lot of joy. And Liverpool Football Club as well, but we don't need to talk about them at the moment.
You'll never walk alone, Mark. I'm a Liverpool fan too.
There you go, right, wicked. We're never walking alone.
It seems surreal to have you on board, a stalwart, an icon in the sports podcasting space, especially with a significant emphasis on Sri Lanka cricket, with you and Estelle being the front runners on that front. We hope we could have a Mark's End with regular shows on the Are You on Cricket as well going forward, but let me not set unrealistic expectations early on, like our Sri Lankan middle order, and just take it one
Look,
show.
I'm always up for anything. Just ask me whenever. If I can do it, I'll do it. As I say, it's a privilege and honour to appear on these shows and talk about cricket with everyone. The thing about cricket is from a kind of broadcasting perspective, there's kind of no wrong takes, is there? There's like bad takes, but it's all about you. Part of the love of the sport is it's sitting around debating the what ifs, the if only this moment, what if we did something slightly differently. I think one of possibly the greatest aspect of Sri Lankan cricket and the culture of cricket in Sri Lanka is it's so innovative, and it's actually in moments when it really needs to, it will try something new, right? If you look at really cricket over the last 30, 40 years, all the big innovations can be traced back to Sri Lanka in some way. And I think that's something as a sports culture we should really be proud of, actually, because there's, I've been watching a lot of the Rugby World Cup recently, and you've been watching the kind of, Fiji get to the quarterfinals, and there's been a lot of talk about how teams in rugby break through and sit at the top table. And you look about across all sports, and really at an international level, I can only think of two examples in the last 30, 40 years where that's happened. In football, you see it with Croatia. People take Croatia very seriously as a footballing team. They've got to finals. And in cricket, realistically, it's only Sri Lanka, right? We're all young enough to not really remember Sri Lanka not being taken seriously at all. But if you go back and you read the history books, the 70s and 80s, people didn't take Sri Lanka seriously as a cricket side. And the people who played for us then had a real struggle. And, the administrators had a real struggle to get fixtures, to find the money. And, as a people across the world, not just the people in Sri Lanka, we've kind of pulled together and we've made something really world class and really elite. And even, we're going to have a conversation now about Sri Lanka maybe not being one of the front runners at the World Cup, but even the fact that A, we expect to be at the World Cup every time, and B, we're disappointed that we're not going to be a front runner is in itself actually quite an achievement.
Very well said, Mark. That was an ode to Sri Lanka cricket and tribute to Sri Lanka cricket to see how far we've come since 1996, ever since we broke that glass ceiling. I compare the 1996 World Cup victory to Leicester City's Premier League triumph as a one-off. The bookies would never have expected it, and here we are as world champions of 1996. Hari, the floor is yours. serve Mark and the rest of us a few juicy full tosses early on, and then we'll ease into the crux of our discussion on the what ifs around Sri Lanka cricket.
Thanks, Varian, for that lovely introduction. And, it's great to have Mark on the show. So we'll just get ease into things and we'll talk a little bit about the World Cup that's been happening right now. It's a very interesting one to follow, to be honest. We've had a lot of interesting games, a lot of interesting upsets, and players who we never would have considered making a mark before the World Cup, but suddenly they're here and it's like, why haven't we ever seen this before? So I'm just going to ask you a few moments and few key highlights up to now about the World Cup and how you're feeling about how it's shaping up to be as a contest overall.
Do you want me to go first? Shall I?
Yeah, sure.
So from a Sri Lanka perspective, I think the highlight has been I want to say Kusal Mendes, but actually I'm going to say the intent of our kind of top three, I think, right? Because I think actually if you've been following Kusal's career the last kind of year and a bit, I think we've definitely seen him in T20 bring the kind of form that we're seeing in ODIs now. And really that's intent. I think we've got to be prepared that he might, for every 100 he's going to hit, he's going to have a game like he did against Australia where he only gets 9 runs, and it's a problem. And he gets out not a stupid way, in a way that we might not have expected him to. I think at the speaking specifically of him, I think earlier in the year I was a bit frustrated with him getting to kind of the 60s, the 50, 40, between the 40s and the 60s, and then getting out, normally caught in the boundary, and he seems to have kind of pushed on a little bit beyond that. I don't know if Merl or Viren have any thoughts on that as well, and he's starting to make those big scores, so that's great. I think Patton kind of really understands his role in the side. I also think he's kind of, I'm a big fan of his, and I think in the next 2 or 3 years is when we're going to see him develop into the superstar batter that I think he could be. And I think Kusal Pereira has come in. The last few years have been terrible for him in terms of injury, but he set a really good platform against Australia. And again, he's changed the way he bats totally, right? So if you go back and look from about 5 or 6 years ago, he's batted. It's almost like he's a different player. But I think he should be at a stage in his career where he kind of reads the ball a lot better, and I think that's what he's doing. I also think one of the other good bits from a Sri Lankan perspective is that we're able to blood a lot of young players and players. I mean, if you go back and you watch the Under-19 World Cup a few years ago, there's absolutely no way you would have thought Walalage and Patarana would have played this much senior cricket at this stage of their careers. I mean, we'll talk, I'm sure, later on about how well it's going for them, because I think it's a bit of a baptism of fire. And in terms of other good highlights from a Sri Lanka perspective, I'm not overly sure there's too much else going on. Maybe Charath's had a couple of good knocks, Sadira's had a couple of good knocks, and beyond that, I mean, maybe if you're going to be super cynical, you might say having to change the captaincy is potentially quite a good thing. But I think that is more kind of a fan thing, and actually we should be more discussing how we end up in a situation where we thought we had to change the captaincy after 2 games, because really for an elite level team, that's kind of unacceptable, if you can be honest about it.
Just a quick follow-up on Pathum, Mark. So we've had many interesting discussions, Viren and I, about Pathum. But just to your point, do you see another level to his game? So I'm increasingly seeing sometimes when he gets to his 40s and 50s, he almost feels a need to accelerate. And at that point, he gets out just playing a loose shot. And he doesn't sometimes have the power to his game to be able to execute certain shots. What I mean, is it more that he should be given more clarity and reassurance that he can play the natural game of an anchor, or is it also to do with him maybe like maybe hitting the gym and becoming a bit more Aiden Markram-like, because I see a lot of Aiden Markram in Pathum Nissanka in his technique, because he would just do punches and the ball would just race to the boundary. So I can see him becoming that. Like, what do you see as the potential evolution, the next step of the evolution for Pathum?
So it's really interesting, right? Because I think I mean, sometimes you look at the stats and you're like, oh gosh, when he does score, he scores too slowly, right? His strike rate is too low. But I think, firstly, I love watching him play, and also for me, in a way, he embodies everything that's beautiful about Sri Lankan cricket, and. When you see these, like, he's a small. I've not been close to him in the flesh. I don't know how small he is, but I think he's quite small. And you see these giant Australian bowlers running in, and then you just see him play a beautiful shot and it glide off to the boundary. I'm like, yeah, that's what this is all about, isn't it? But where he develops, Mel, I think that's like almost $1 million question, isn't it? I think. If you go back to the Australian innings, and from an opening partnership perspective, that's kind of the perfect innings, right? Because the openers bat the first 20 overs, they set a good platform, then they're going at an all right rate, which I think probably for that pitch was probably about fine. I'm sure you can find people who argue they need to go at more, and maybe they do. But cricket's a weird game, you never know. But you're like. And then there definitely, as you said, there was that thing when he starts to open up and he loses his wicket. And I do think that might be a slight worry. I also think, though, that international cricket and playing the best teams in international cricket is just a cut above. I've spoken to loads of former and current professional cricketers who told me it's like you can play as much A-class cricket and first grade cricket as you want all over the world, but then suddenly you're at the MCG or you're playing against the fastest bowlers in the world, and they don't have that one ball and over that you can hit to the boundary, and every single ball is absolutely perfect. It's swinging both ways. They've got 6 variations, and they're doing 10 overs off that, and you might get the odd bad ball, but it's very rare. And I still think that he's at a stage in his career where he's still learning the ropes, and I've seen a few Sri Lankan, followers of Sri Lankan cricket and people who create content talk about, do we need to change the domestic structure? I was talking to Michael St. Patrick Hewitt, who does a lot of stuff in West Indian cricket last week, and he was saying the domestic structure is too weak. In England, the constant question is always, do we need to reform county cricket? Is it strong enough to produce players to go into international cricket? In Australia, I've heard them have these discussions about the Sheffield Shield as well. I think it's just globally around the world, domestic cricket can only get a player perform, to a certain level, and then they've got to go into the main arena in international cricket, and you've just got to learn on the job. I think he's like, if he was updating it as an app, if Pathum Nissanka was refreshing, I think he's about 75% there, and there's a lot more room for him to grow as a player, and I think he'll learn to read stuff a bit better. And I'm hoping when he does eventually get to a stage when he wants to open up the innings, that he learns to pick it a bit more. I think already, and this is difficult because a lot of this you're just judging by your eye, right? I think already he's a better player than he was a year ago, and I think ODIs probably might end up being his best format, especially because it looks like they're not overly keen on playing him in red ball cricket. I'm not entirely sure why, and I think at this stage he's still a little bit slow for T20, though I think he might be a necessary evil in terms of his evil strike rate at the top for Sri Lankan T20 for the moment. But we can discuss that when the next T20 set of games happen.
And just quickly kind of following up on that, Mark nailed it when he said that these youngsters are facing a baptism of fire. And I don't think our keyboard warriors back home are helping either, right? And I look at the other end of this, right? You have players like Pathum Nissanka, Dilshan Madhushankar, Matisha Patharan, and Dunit Wellalge, who are nowhere close to their prime. 2027 would be that ideal World Cup to see where they've kind of come to. And so I think they're 4 years ahead of their prime, and I think it's just exceptional to see their resilience. Wellalage is an example I want to highlight, right? He didn't have favorable conditions to bowl in against South Africa and Pakistan, but came back and bowled quite decently against Australia, in my opinion. It was unfortunate that there was no scoreboard pressure to work with. But had we posed 300, 310 on the board, I'm not sure Labuschagne would have been allowed to kind of see Wellalage off during those middle overs. And I think it would have been a different game altogether. And credit is due where credit is deserved. And I think had Dilshan Madhushankar had a Dushmant Chamir at the other end early on, when he trapped Steve Smith and Warner in that same over, and had we had Dushmant Chamir running in from the other end, we could have had a different result altogether. But we'll get to the what ifs later on. I want to highlight one other team that I've been surprised by in this World Cup. And I'm not referring to Robin van Persie, the Flying Dutchman, but I'm referring to the Flying Dutchman in the Dutch side, right? In every World Cup, you have that one-off result that takes the world by storm. In 2015, we had, in 2011, we had the Irish doing it against England in Bengaluru with Kevin O'Brien's scintillating century. In 2015, we had Afghanistan's resurgence beating Scotland. I know people don't take that as a feat or an achievement, but I think given the fact that it was their first 50-over World Cup, that was something of note. Ireland had a few impressive results in that World Cup as well. This World Cup needed something like the result yesterday to kind of kick it off. You know, we had Afghanistan beating England as well. And these upsets, I wouldn't call Afghanistan versus England an upset because it was the 6th ranked side facing the 9th ranked side. I think it's only an upset because you're talking about the defending champions. But don't forget, they were playing at home in 2019. They're playing in subcontinental conditions, which haven't suited them historically as well. So I wouldn't take that as an upset. But Netherlands versus South Africa was an upset for me. And I'm going to make an early prediction here, Harry, before I come back to you. I still fancy South Africa to go all the way in this World Cup. And I think it was a blessing in disguise that they had a bad result early on. Historically, South Africa have had stellar runs, been unbeaten up until the knockout stages and choked at the latter stages of the World Cup. You could even take last year's T20 World Cup. Having beaten India, they lost to Netherlands, but because of the way the tournament was structured, there was no way they could progress. But having this result early on could be a good enough wake-up call for Themba Bavuma and his troops to come back strong and I think potentially push India all the way this year.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you there. I think if I were to draw a parallel to last World Cup, I think it's kind of similar in Sri Lanka's victory over England. Even though it was at a more latter stage, I think it did serve as a little bit of a kick in the backside. Okay, we can't let go too much. We had a stellar run, but we do have to hold our reins quite tightly if we are to see this through. And the Netherlands, they're a very entertaining side to watch as well. You have very interesting personalities, interesting skill sets right from their top order, their all-rounders and their bowlers. Sri Lanka, we've spoken a bit about their performance in the World Cup. I want to talk a little bit about the journey to the World Cup, the last few months before, their preparations, the series they've been playing, the kind of cricket they've been playing, the selections, the players that have been tested, not tested, the confusing people who've been left out. How do you evaluate that entire process for Sri Lanka? And has it put us in a really good position to kind of make the best use of this World Cup opportunity? Mark, if you want to start on that?
I suppose we really need to start at the LPL, right? I mean, firstly, what I should say is I think the LPL is the greatest franchise tournament in the world. I think it's up there with the Champions League and the English Premier League. I think it's got the potential to be something great for not just Sri Lankan cricket, but for Sri Lanka as well. I think it's brilliant that there's this opportunity to bring players from all over the best T20 players from all over the world to come and play cricket on the island, and for people in Sri Lanka to have a chance to go and see them. There's a lot of criticism with SLC about when they plan this tournament, when they plan the LPL. Thing is, is I do have a little bit of sympathy because, firstly, professional cricketers exist to play cricket, right? There's got to be a limit to how much you can wrap players in cotton wool. Essentially, if Hasaranga hadn't got injured, then we wouldn't even be having this conversation, I don't think. Chamira was injured a long way before that, or has been struggling with injuries for years now. That LPL tournament was finished mid-August, end of
Yeah.
August, was it?
2 weeks before the Asian Cup. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, you look at it, it was about 6 weeks before the start of the World Cup. Could you imagine if I said to any of us, I was like, right, in your day jobs, we've got a really important thing for 6 weeks, which means that you can't do your day job for 6 weeks before that, or take it very easy. You think that's ridiculous. What I do think that there is a bit of an issue is in the way that SLC manage players' injuries. It turns, firstly, it's really difficult to get any information out of SLC. Though you know the press conferences seem to be quite vague. They do put a lot of press releases out, but it's not often about player fitness. Sports press conferences exist around the world in every sport, in every discipline, and the one guaranteed question you get in every conference is which players are fit, and how far away are the unfit players from coming back. It turns out now that this hamstring injury that Hasaranga has had, that he's now been operated on in London and gone back to SL for rehab. Apparently, he's been struggling with it for a while before the IPL even started. And I just feel, and I know they've got various committees and all that, but I just feel that there is a layer of player kind of conditioning that isn't being provided for our elite level athletes. And this is what the third ICC tournament we're going into, admittedly 3 in 3 years, where we've had problems with trying to get our best 11 out. And thus far, this seems a tournament where we're experiencing the worst ramifications from that, because in every game there's at least 20 overs being bowled that we know aren't being bowled by our best players. I'm probably missing, I'm probably missing another 10 overs, and also that has such a bigger impact in terms of team selection as well. We talked about baptism of fire, and look, I love Will Argo, and I think he's got the potential to be an absolute legend in cricket and could achieve a lot. But realistically, what we saw happen to him in the first couple of games, and Patarana as well, should never have been allowed to happen. And we don't know what, those are the kind of games that can have a seriously detrimental effect on those two players' development in the kind of medium term. And so from having one problem of not managing Hasaranga's injury well, they've ended up creating another problem. And you could say the third problem is it puts no pressure at all on DDS's spot in the team as well. If the wider question is what was our preparation going into the tournament, if you look back at the qualifiers when they took Dimmoth, and then they've now decided to drop Dimmoth, and I'm trying to say this without giving any of my personal take on whether or not it should be dropped. I just think they've mismanaged that bit of the squad selection. So now we're in a situation where Will Argo and DDS are pretty much going to play every game, because the option is to have Dimmoth play at 6, which is just not going to work, is it? And you can kind of trace all this back to two things: bad decision making at SLC. And I know Mahela went out and did a big interview that is well worth reading on over the weekend, talking about how they've got future plans. So I'm hoping that they don't need to listen to us lot talk about this and they've already thought about these things. And these are, they're going to, in the future, be able to change. They won't think so. I kind of want to say narrow thinking. But I do think in the last kind of couple of years, the thinking around the team has changed a bit. They just need to think a little bit longer term, in my opinion. Because I think that when it happened I'm just ranting now. When it happened a couple of years ago, in the T20 World Cup, and I think just about everyone had a bowl for Sri Lanka, right? I think me and Merle were on the reserve list right, at one point to go out there and have a game. There was the whole, oh, well, isn't it great all these boys are getting opportunities? And it was great, all these boys are getting opportunities. But, and then when it happened in Australia, like, okay, twice it's kind of unfortunate. Third time round, I mean, like when the squad was finally selected and they kept us waiting to the last minute for that. I was kind of like, well, it kind of doesn't matter because we all know at some point Kamara will get a bowl, Banura Fernando will get a bowl, Rajastha will get a bowl, Pramod will get a bowl, because there's going to be injuries, because it just feels like there's nobody kind of taking control of that aspect of it, and it's having such a knock-on effect for the whole thing.
And Mark and Merle, I want to get your take on this. And this is linked to what Mark just said about planning. Let's take England as the model example. In 2015, immediately after that debacle against Bangladesh, where they hit rock bottom in Australia, Morgan and the ECB revamped English cricket altogether. They identified their weaknesses, trusted a pool of players like Roy and Bairstow, gave them the guarantee that even if they were to fail once or twice, that they would be the openers batting for England 4 years down the line at the 2019 World Cup. Revamped their style of play. And there was immaculate planning during the World Cup cycle. So we have the ODI World Cup cycle, we now have the T20 World Cup cycle, and the Test Championship cycle. Each three formats, 9 out of the 10 teams at this World Cup have immaculate planning during each of those cycles. But and this is a two-pronged question. Firstly, on selection, if you look at our bench strength or squad depth at this World Cup, we only have one other batsman, which is Dimuth Karunaratne on the bench. So, as Mark said, even if Dhananjay was to fail regularly, even if Charit has a rough patch, their place in the side is sealed because we don't have anyone else to replace them. And my second, so it's about the rationale behind certain selections. Yes, you can only control the controllables. We have a few injuries to contend with. But I'm quite sure the likes of Avishka Fernando, Nuanidu Fernando, even youngsters, if we wanted to extend this baptism of fire, even youngsters like Lassit Cruz Pulle, Siobhan Daniel might have fit that role that we want. My second question, after we address selection, is on the role of a certain consultant coach who comes into the setup a week before the World Cup each time, is a tad too busy with certain engagements with the Mumbai Indians franchise throughout these cycles. My question is, at the point at which Chris Silverwood and Naveed Nawaz kind of single-handedly won us an Asia Cup without anyone kind of expecting us to, could we just leave them to their devices and allow them to oversee the team? And is this a case of having too many coaches and consultant coaches in the setup? Mark and then Merle.
Do you know what? I'll let Merle go first, because first I've spoken loads, and second I want to hear what his opinion is on this.
I did have a follow-up on Vanidu Hasranga, which I'll come back to later. But to your point, Viren, about the absolute clarity that the English had after the 2015 debacle, and one thing which Jared keeps talking about in his show like consistently is like England is the one team which has gone furthest in terms of role clarity. So they are not being evaluated on traditional metrics of what's your average, what's your strike rate. You've been assigned a certain role and you are supposed to stick to it. And the utter confusion in the Sri Lankan camp is not just Sri Lanka. I mean, it's evidenced not just by the fact that it's only one batter we have, and even the batter we have, we can't find a place to slot him in, even if someone gets injured. Where do we put Dimuth Karunaratne? So completely an utter lack of thinking. And even so, I think this also ties back to some of the frustrations that we see. I don't know whether you can directly attribute these things to the lack of clarity in roles, but like the way certain players seems to bat, and I won't name names, to almost like save their counting statistics, like in terms of like where they end up at the end of an innings. Like, is this because they want to beef up their numbers as opposed to like doing the absolute best they can given the role they have on the team to like win the match. So I mean, these are like all questions we have, and like Avishka Fernando and Lasith Cruz-Pulle are like two batters Viren and I are so high on, and we feel like they've proven one. Avishka has proven himself in the past, and he's proven himself recently. And I guess like if Sri Lanka is to transition into an attacking batsman in the shorter formats of the game, I think Lasith Cruz-Pulle is a must, and you should give him a much longer leash going forward.
I agree with what a lot of Mel said there. In terms of the coaches, let's talk about the consultant coach first. Basically, in my mind, in my opinion, and I'm probably wrong, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think he's the best cricket brain in the world, not just in Mumbai, not just in Colombo, like in the world. I think he's been a great servant to the game in SL. I think we want to keep him involved. I think the reality is that Sri Lanka Cricket is a very successful organisation with lots of money, but it's never going to have enough money to employ him full time. If we can get him as a consultant, I think that's absolutely fine. I think from what I can see and from what has been put out, it's quite clear what his role is. I think my worry is I still think that there's too many competing parts within the Sri Lankan cricket world, and I still think there's too many former players fighting for a patch of land. I still think that there is that like when I saw Dimmoth was in the team, I just assumed he was going to start because I just cannot understand why you take him and you do not play him. I have absolutely no issues with Dimmoth at all as a player, but I think it's very clear you know what you're going to get when you select him, right? And I can understand the rationale for picking him going into the qualifiers, even though like we probably kind of overestimated how difficult the qualifiers were going to be. But I just think it was so, in hindsight, it looks so obvious that you don't need him in the game. I think in Sri Lanka in general that we have too much respect for past achievements and age, and actually maybe they need to just go, do you know what, we don't need any of our senior pros. And if they were going to pick a senior pro, I think there is the strangest one to pick, right? I think you can make, if you kind of broadly say there's three kind of senior pros in and around the Sri Lanka setup, which is Nad, Dimmoth, Angelo, and Chandimal. You're like, well, Angelo and Chandimal offer you so much more, right? If you'd pick one of those two, I think, for an ODI tournament. It's just weird to me that they've picked him. And picked him and then not played him, because I think that makes them really hamstrung. But I wonder who is the person who's selecting that. Who is the person who's going, let's do that? Because I followed Mahela and the way he picks his T20 sides for Mumbai, and even when he was coaching the 100, and it just doesn't feel like it's a Mahela pick. I don't think it's a Chris Silverwood pick either. It's somebody else almost going, we need this, we need to have this take out this insurance policy, because it kind of goes back to respect, and also the role that Shane plays in Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia, really. It's a society where they don't want to have a batting collapse, so they think if all else fails, then Dimmoth will be able to bat 30 overs and score at 1 run and over, right? And that to me can be the only rationale behind it. So I think you can't really look at the question about coaching and about who's selecting it without acknowledging that there seems to be different kind of fractions behind the scene in Sri Lankan cricket. I mean, every other month it sounds like we might get a cricket coup. I mean, Sri Lanka famously, like since democracy came in, hasn't had a coup. It's been on the brink of it a few times, but in cricket terms, we have bloodless coups all the time, right? And I just think that if we have a bad tournament, and I think a bad tournament is finishing anywhere below 7th, and let's be honest, at the point of us recording that, it looks like that's where we're heading. Then I really wonder what might happen in terms of Mahela's role and everyone else that he's kind of put into position underneath him. When actually, when you look at if you look at the structure that I think he's trying to put into place, because Mahela's smart, right? We talked about England's preparation. When you look at what he says, he's kind of already saying, I know that we can't win this tournament. I know it's about putting the future into place. And, I think I suspect if it was up to him, I think he would have taken Avishka or Cruz Pele. I think he would have taken either of those two players. I think there's a whole host of batters that could have made it. I think they're slightly hamstrung by how small the squad is as well. And actually taking a small squad to a World Cup, really, the teams it benefits are the bigger, more established sides, and it's just the kind of the teams that come from, in terms of population-wise, smaller areas like Sri Lanka that are most harmed, because we're the side that needs to blood the players in for the longest before they kind of, they need the most amount of experience at the highest level if they're going to reach it. So in terms of coaching, I think we've got like a decent setup behind it, but I think there's other currents running behind it that aren't necessarily, there's people that nominally support Sri Lanka, but actually, do they actually want Sri Lanka to succeed? Do they actually want the squad that are out there to succeed? You have to question that.
And I want to add a disclaimer to my question earlier. By no means was I placing the blame on Mahela, and I completely agree with Mark. If you're having a consultant coach, if you have coaches like Silverwood and Navas, I think they should have a say with the squad they take to a World Cup. There's no point bringing them in or bringing Mahela in once the squad has been named. Like Mahela has made brave decisions with the Southern Brave in England, with the Mumbai Indians, bringing the likes of Deval Brevis, Tristan Stubbs into the fray, giving youngsters an opportunity like Tilak Verma an opportunity to shine. And I agree with Mark. I think if Mahela had his say, you would have youngsters like Avishka Fernando and Nuanidu Fernando, who had a good tour in India in January, being given an opportunity to go in. And it's quite it's quite shocking as a Sri Lankan cricket fan to know that there are various fractions here when it comes to selecting a squad. If you look at India, when they announce every single squad, you have Ajit Agarkar, the chairman of selectors, seated alongside Rohit Sharma to announce a squad for each and every comp, be it the Asia Cup, be it the World Cup. So you have a bit of a background into the decision making by Rahul Dravid, etc., and the coaching staff. And you also have the captain's say on the matter. With Sri Lankan cricket, not only do you change captains midway through a comp, but I doubt Dasun Shanaka had his blueprint on this team to begin with. And I think that is what's concerning about Sri Lankan cricket, because it's those on the outside and those external parties alone who make a decision. And I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but Chris Silverwood, when he was head coach in England, was also the chairman of selectors. And England tried this dual responsibility role on the head coach to see if this would work out. I personally rank Chris Silverwood to be a very good coach. There's a reason the ECB appointed him as head coach, but I think he was overburdened in England with that additional responsibility of being chairman of selectors. And the 5-0 dropping of the Ashes can't be attributed to Chris Silverwood's coaching. And I think he's a stellar head coach. We even have Naveed Nawaz, who's our assistant coach. I was lucky enough to play under him at Fingara when he had his academy in Colombo. And then he went on to be the head coach of Bangladesh at the Under-19 World Cup. And Bangladesh had a victorious run there. And I think these are facets of very good coaches. But as Mark said, it's unfortunate that none of these coaches seem to be able to fulfill their roles and responsibilities because of this external influence. And Hari, I'm going to bring you in here because I want to get your take on this. It's a sports breakdown sending us quite a few questions. Everyone else, feel free to do so as well, and we'll pose it to Mark. I'll come to Hari first and then get Mark's take on this. So there's a lot of talk about our lack of intent in our middle order. And being honest, Dasun Shanaka for me is the best finisher Sri Lanka currently has. He's proven himself time and time again in T20s Less so in ODIs, but definitely in T20s. I recall that memorable knock in Pallekele against Australia, which I was lucky enough to witness live. I know Kusal Pereira has finally found his groove at the top of the order. But would you bring Kusal Janit down to the middle order and promote someone like a DDS? Personally, for me, I have a very different take to this. I want Kusal Mendis to open the batting, and I think the match against Australia proved it to me. He needs to have some time at the center during the power play to really get his innings going. And I think he was exposed to Adam Zampa in that game against Australia very early on, and we saw the end result of it. So, Hari, your thoughts on this potential change?
Okay, so I'll just start off with talking about the DDS element to this. I think we've discussed previously as well on the show. I think DDS batting right now where he does a disservice to the whole team and to his potential as well. He isn't someone who we're expecting. I think we've never expected him to take on that kind of finisher, power hitter role. He is someone, in my opinion, who comes a bit earlier on and takes control with singles, doubles, strike rotation, and really hones the innings and allows another player or players after him to have that good platform to export from there. So in terms of moving him up the order, I think there's definitely a need to do so. Whether it's the opening slots of the top three is still up to debate for me, because I'm not too sure of his abilities against the new balls as well. And in the case of Kusal Pereira, right, it's very interesting because he's someone who's historically been up the order and someone who's very confident in the new ball and someone whose game revolves around boundary hitting with those much more tighter fielding restrictions, where he's able to go over the fielder, where he's able to get those boundaries early on and put the pressure on the opponent. Him going a bit lower down the order, I think negates that heavily, because where his shots may have gone to the boundary in the power play, they're reaching the field in the deep. And that negates his potential. I think it slows down the game too much. And then, he's someone who's been used to that kind of gameplay. So we could see him take riskier shots. We're putting the team in even more jeopardy. I think that's my take on it. I'm sure the others will have a take as well. And just to add on to your previous point, right, about a lot of voices being there in that kind of think tank of decision making. If you take two very, I think, drastic revolutions in terms of cricket science, we spoke about England and Owen Morgan, and I think another example would be MS Dhoni earlier on in the late 2000s, early 2010s. You always felt a sense of ownership that these captains had over their teams. And there weren't too many voices involved. At max, they might have been 1, 2, or 3. But these guys would have absolute control, absolute transparency, and it was very clear what their approach was in both occasions. It differs slightly, and it's a great comparison because they're both very different in terms of the way they lead and the way they pick their players, but still it's a very distinct kind of ownership they take. Whereas with the current Sri Lankan setup, it's very tough to say that this is Dasan's team. He's had the longest captaincy run. He's been up, and he has had a very decent captaincy record, but nowhere can you say this is Dasan's team. These are Dasan's guys. It just feels like he's having to play with the cards he's dealt rather than taking ownership. With that little side tangent, I want to take your guys' takes on the whole DDS usage. I think we've spoken a lot about this as well, Viren, in the previous shows. So why don't you kick us off with it?
Yeah, I'm going to pose a question to all our viewers. In your opinion, what is the greatest ever switch from number 6/number 7 to being an opener? I can't think beyond Sri Lanka. TM Dilshan for me was that greatest switch, right? A player who revolutionized his style of play by moving up the order after Sanath Jayasuriya retired, and kind of led to us having a period of consistency at the top after Sanath retired. Upul Taranga and Dilshan basically took over from where Sanath and Taranga left off after 2007. And I think that change worked out brilliantly for Dilshan. But my worry with DDS is Dilshan was a naturally aggressive batsman even when he batted at number 6, number 7. He didn't have to change his intent, but batting in the power play actually helped him further his chances of making an impact in the game. But for DDS to have the so-called aggressive impact that we want him to have, I don't think he has I'm not questioning his talent, etc., but I don't think it's his natural game to be aggressive at the top. If you have Patum Nisanka playing the anchor role, I don't think we're moving from Patum and Dimut to Patum and DDS, because I think the end result is the same. We're playing it safe, right? And I want to bring back what Mark said earlier on. With Team Sri Lanka's selections recently, we have been playing it safe. We've set our ceiling quite low. We're happy with posting 250, 260 regularly without trying to push for a 340, 350 with the off chance of us collapsing to and getting all out at 200. But those are the types of risks I want to see Sri Lanka take. We've hit rock bottom now. Teams who have hit rock bottom in the past have revolutionized their style of play. India was a good example that you highlighted, Hari, after 2007. England after 2015. Australia as well, after they had a mass exodus of legends in the late 2000s. And I think that's the type of intent I want to see with Sri Lanka cricket. Mark, your thoughts?
Go, Mel. Give us your thoughts first, and then.
So I mean, with Nisanka and DDS, I think Viren, you and I have had multiple conversations over this, and I think we landed on the conclusion that Sri Lanka can only have one of DDS or Pathum Nisanka in their limited overs cricket. We can't have both. We just cannot have both. And I don't see another place for DDS other than in the top three. And I think Kusal Mendis has proven himself enough. And I slightly differ from Viren that I think Kusal Mendis should be number 3. Because Sri Lanka should pair an anchor with a really aggressive batter, even more aggressive than Kusal Mendis, like at the very top. And what we do about the middle order, I really don't have a lot of good answers. So I mean, so yesterday Viren and I were brainstorming a hypothetical Sri Lankan 11. If they were firing to their full potential, what would the middle order look like? So we had Charita Salanka, I think, at 5, who was a combination of Michael Bevan and Lance Klusner. That's the ceiling that we see. And we have Dasun Shanak coming after him, who plays not near to what he played against Australia, but somewhere like in that vicinity. And we also have Hasaranga and Vellalage in the long term developing into something approximating a Jadeja. So he's far too young for that. But like I think he has what's between. I mean, like he's one player that I, at least like based on the vibes that I get off the field, who seems to care really a lot about like the game and what he's going to become and what he wants out of the game. And I did see this during the LPL as well. So I don't think like in the long term we have to make a lot of changes if our batters do like hit their ceiling and hit them at a consistent enough level. I don't think we'll ever have the Livingstons and the Butlers of the world where they can just whack balls out of the park. That does not seem to be what we are. But like, I mean, if the players do hit their ceilings, I think we have something to work with, especially if we fire at the top with the Kusal Mendisas, the Sadira Samarikramas of the world.
I largely agree with that. Going back to the original question about moving DDS up, I think I said I think it's a good idea on Twitter, but I think the reality is that the only thing that's really actually worked extraordinarily well for Sri Lanka in the first 3 games has been that top 3. I don't know why we want to change it at this point. It's too much of a risk in case, and I understand it. And DDS is a great player. He's been, he when he's good, he's very, very good. At the moment, he's just really out of form. It doesn't mean that he's still 31. It doesn't mean like he's done or anything. I still think he can go away and find his form and come back. I've always felt DDS has had a bit of a rough ride with being in and out of the side, but then a lot of the players have as well, I suppose. This goes back to a selection issue, isn't it? We've got a player who's incredibly out of form. The only other option you've got on the bench is, I suppose Hemantha could come into the team. I don't know. He's barely played any actual ODI cricket, right? So I don't know how much of a risk they think it is to put him in. And also, I've never met DDS, so I don't know what he's like, how he would react to being dropped. because sometimes some players, all they need is to be dropped for 2 or 3 games. Drop him for a couple of games, he comes back in and he finds his form. I feel with DDS over the last few months, you've seen him go from actually great form to kind of having playing really scratchy innings in some of the test matches we had a few months ago to now playing just it almost looks like he's not meant to be there. And I was so gutted for him when he dragged the ball onto his stumps the other day, because I always think when you're out of form, that is the worst way to possibly get out, right? So yeah, I don't really know what they do. I'm sure the coaches have an idea and they're closer to the side. I mean, I think I talked about Sri Lanka as being an innovative cricket nation. If they were to do that and it was to come off, you'd be like, that's one of the greatest kind of pieces of innovative thinking and coaching that's ever happened. Because I think all the reason why people are talking about it, right, is because all the stats suggest that he plays best, or he's got the highest strike rate when he bats, when he opens. But then, like, if you look at every team in the world, they're all their top 5 batters are openers, right? That's just the way international cricket works, isn't it?
And Merle, I'll come to you for your follow-up questions to Mark. And I think it's a good time to highlight a name that Mark raised for the first time on the show, and that was Dushan Hemant. We've taken him as our prime leg spinner, as our primary leg spinner. And I don't think our selectors trust him enough with the bat, which is why he hasn't featured yet in the top 7. I've seen glimpses of him in domestic cricket, and I think he can be quite handy with the bat. And this raises Shastreek's question here, is we had an experienced leg spinner who's been selected for a World Cup previously in 2019 alongside Jeevan Mendis as our 2 leg spinners that we took with us in 2019. So perhaps if we were counting on experience, that was a good shout, Shastreek. Thanks for the question. I want to bring up this table that I shared a couple of days ago. I know I got a lot of backlash on the lack of strike rates on this table, but I think I want to highlight something here before I get to Merle. In ODI cricket, I still think having decent averages as a number 6 or number 7 batsman is important. Yes, there's a significant emphasis on strike rates in T20 cricket, because when you're 4/5 down, it's typically around the 14th/15th over when you come into bat, unless there has been a major collapse at the top. But during this World Cup, in Indian conditions, in the last 3 games for that matter, we've seen number 6, number 7 batsmen coming into bat around the 25th to 30th over mark. And they're expected to sometimes play the anchor role to rebuild and then gradually increase momentum of the innings. And this is where this table comes clutch, right? You have players like Iftikhar, David Miller, Josh Butler, and even Scott Edwards, who is now my new favorite player after his scintillating knock yesterday, right? It's quite crazy that a Dutch has a better lap sweep than any of the Sri Lankan middle order batsmen, but that kind of personifies the state of the Sri Lankan middle order right now. But you look at these 2 averages of DDS and Dasun Shanker, and that is significant grounds for concern, taking all 20 number 6 and number 7 batsmen that play for all 10 teams in the World Cup. And my question to, and my final comment on this is, yes, it's important for us to look at strike rates, but I think it's important for our viewers to realize that the role fulfillment of a number 6 and number 7 batsman in ODI cricket differs slightly to what is expected of them in T20s. And Merle, I'll come to you for your question.
I think, Mark, this was posed to you, and I am to follow up with a final question.
So basically, I think that table's kind of moot now, right? Because I think Dutton is at the side. Obviously, he's got an injury, that's why he had to leave. And I think, I mean, I take no pleasure from saying this, but I think DDS's place in the team is on his last legs, right? I think at this point, if Wanindu was fit, I don't know how long his rehab is, I think he comes in, and I think Walalage keeps his place at this stage. Or they might look at someone else. I think if you didn't do the stats for Charmaker probably because he wasn't in the squad at that point. I'd like to know what his stats are, because I think the one major place where we seem to be missing is a seeming all rounder, right? We need somebody who can bowl a few overs, who can and this is why I was saying earlier, I was kind of surprised if they were going to go from the old men of shrunken cricket, they went for Dimmoth and not Angelo, because I think Angelo could have done a job if needed to over there, and would have been again. I think so much of this goes back to picking Dimmoth as that extra batter, because it now just feels like the team is so just held in the place it is, and I kind of feel for DDS because he's going to be out potentially. He's either got to find some form on the go, or it just doesn't appear to me he's going to be dropped. I think Hemantho is, just a nut. He's in that squad, and I don't think they've got any intention of playing him. And I think it's probably because he's just another player in the long line of one of those great Sri Lankan innovations, which is professional fielder, right? He's kind of usurped Ashwin Bandara, and he's become our professional fielder. He'll field all 50 overs, but poor man never gets the bat or bowl. I don't know how it works in terms of appearance fees. If you field, do you get paid? Like who knows? And that goes all the way back, right, to 1996 when we had Paul Chandana on the field, right? So it's a great tradition of Sri Lankan cricket, and I'm glad in some ways they're keeping it alive. But maybe they should have taken a player they might have played.
At least there's been some consistency on that front in terms of who feels at point.
Exactly, right? Exactly.
Well, over to you.
So we are nearing the hour mark. So this might be one of the, if not the last question, one of the last questions. So I want to pick up on the point about Hasaranga to ask two questions from Mark. One for which I genuinely don't know the answer to, and it's related to the modern direction that the game of cricket is heading. So Vanidu over the last half a decade has been the only unquestionable world-class cricketer that we produce. He's been coveted by all the leagues around the world, and one can't help but wonder. So, like cricketers, especially from countries like Sri Lanka, don't have a large window where they can maximize their earning and a living for the rest of their lives. So they are naturally gravitated towards whatever the opportunities that might come their way. And this is a point I picked up from, I think, the book of Tim Wigmore and Freddie Wilde about Cricket 2.0. And the point they were trying to make is it was almost like a prediction, almost like a things to think about for the future. How players who are coveted by multiple leagues around the world are going to manage their personal health. Is it up to the cricket boards? Like, how are the incentives aligned, because players have to perform in each of the leagues? A minor injury that you might otherwise prevent in a national setup, players will be forced to play with them. And Viren and I also had a discussion about how even within the LPL there are certain pressures on players to perform, and they might not get their next contract. Just a question, this is the part I don't know the answer to, and this is my first question, whether you would know how other countries are doing it, especially in England, whether there are more organized ways of handling the player health. That's one. And the second question is about the trajectory of Vanidu. And I think Mark and I at some point were worrying on Twitter about the direction of Vanidu, and potentially players figuring out certain aspects about Vanidu and him becoming a bit too predictable. And I don't think it was very well received, because even then his stats were amazing. And I don't know whether the LPL taught us much about whether that trajectory has changed or not. True, he was the highest wicket taker, but he was playing in very friendly conditions he were familiar with. Even though we had some good players within the team, rather across the teams, like international players across the team, was that a good indication that he had maybe carved out if not the second coming, he had solved some of the problems that the batters seemed to be posing to him? Are you optimistic about maybe the second iteration of Hasranga? So those two questions.
Yeah, so I'll talk about what I think about his bowling at the first. I'll kind of answer those in a backward way. So I think they're really three interesting questions. I mean, you've talked about it on Twitter quite a bit, I think. So I felt going into the last IPL that I think I was starting to feel this at the last World Cup, where I think the better teams, the teams with the more sophisticated mechanics behind them, had started to suss him out a little bit. And I thought he desperately needed to get back to the IPL, because I thought, and this isn't a slight at any of the coaches he's working on in Sri Lanka, but I thought he needed some fresh thinking, because sometimes you just need to go and work with you need a different way of working, right? And I kind of felt, I think he didn't have, by his very high standards, he didn't have a great IPL. I kind of think we're right to talk about Hasaranga 2.0. I think that's the what is coming through and what's developing right now. And I think he's a really clever player. I think Sri Lanka produces really smart cricketers, right? And he's one of those players. If I've worked out and you've worked out that he's been sussed out, he's worked it out that he's been sussed out. So I think this is what we're going to see. What we're seeing now, or what we should see, will be the making of him, right? Because I think we'll start to see him transitioning and developing new balls. I think he only probably need kind of 2 more variations, and it's enough to kind of mix it up a little bit. Because also I think he got into a bit of a place where he felt like he could always buy a wicket, and then what happened was we had a bit of a phase where he was going for in international cricket in the IPL, where he was going for lots of runs and not getting a wicket, and then we had a phase where he started to just not go for as many runs as he used to go to, and then he went off to the qualifiers and he just got bags of wickets and the LPL. But I think that speaks more for the quality of the players and the pitches being super friendly to him as well. So I'm not sure what's coming next. I'm hoping what we're going to see is a situation where he starts to realise that he needs to go for not very runs, and he starts to pick up wickets. The thing that interests me the most about him and his career at the moment is his batting, because when people were talking about him a few years ago, we were talking about him as a batter who could spin the ball a little bit. People were kind of suggesting that he could be a kind of Dilshan or Jai in the Jayasuriya mode, and then his batting seemed to just kind of fall away. What's really interesting, I think, about his batting is that he tends to have his best innings when the team is most under pressure, which is so counterintuitive to almost how every batter works. Because normally people pick play their best innings when the team is doing badly, right? And it's kind of falling apart. So the fact that he was able to, his greatest innings in the Sri Lanka jersey with the bat was the Asia Cup final, right? That we won, and that happened at the highest pressure moment. So, and then again we saw it at the LPL, where they gave him responsibility, and he suddenly starts to step up, right? And in fact, really, what happens is he ends up batting. Was he batting on one leg when he got injured? Right. If it wasn't for that bloody captaincy, he might have made this tournament. So I'm interested to see where he's at. It just shows he's a great competitor. I've heard stories of coaches the last few years really challenging him with the bat, and apparently he's always telling the coaches that he's working with, I can bat, put me higher, put me higher, put me higher. In the IPL, they don't seem to rate his batting at all. And I've heard stories of coaches going, you've only got 2 shots, and if the ball's not in your arc, you don't hit it. And I think we're starting to see the work that he's putting in come to fruition, where he's developing his shot range, developing, I hope. But, he's coming back from quite a major injury now. So let's see where the batting lands. It might take a couple of months to get going again. Who knows? In terms of how players look after themselves, because I think this is a massive, this is the kind of big thing that we've got to talk about with Sri Lankan cricket at the moment. I think the place where Sri Lankan players should be looking at is the West Indies, and how their top players look after themselves, because they're if you're in Sri Lanka, obviously the easy comparison to make is we're Indian players, Pakistani players, and I suppose Bangladeshi players as well. But all those 3 players all those three countries are for cricketers, they're able to earn a lot more money than our boys are able to earn domestically in Sri Lanka, right? So we've got to look at the West Indies because that's the closest we have in a comparison, right? Small island that produces a lot of high quality talent, and they quite often going to have to leave or almost every circumstance will have to leave to make the real serious money, right? And for quite a while, some of their top players have, employed their own PTs, their own physios, and basically taking control of it themselves. I think, though, the other thing that needs consideration is where franchise cricket is heading. So we're heading to a place in the next kind of 2 or 3 years where you're never going to be more than about 10 days away from one of the big IPL teams playing another big IPL team in a somewhere around the globe somewhere. And because of that, I think what will happen is, and I think this is, from my understanding, is this has started to happen already, is that you will get a big major contract, which will mean that you play 4 or 5 tournaments for them across the globe, and they will be in charge of you. And actually, if I'm going to be brutally honest about this, Mel, and politically, I take no great. It doesn't fill me with joy to say this. I think that the billionaire owners of IPL franchise teams or cricket franchise teams will take much better care of their multi-millionaire cricketers than the cricket boards are able to at the moment, and that is simply down to the pure finances of it, where every time Wanadu Hasaranga misses a tournament, then the owners of Royal Challenge or Royal Challenge Mumbai, Royal Challenge KL, or wherever across the world lose money, and therefore they will do everything in their can to keep him fit and healthy and playing and provide him, and this goes back to the original point, with all the best coaching they can possibly get, so they're getting the most amount of him. I think we're already seeing that with Patarana and Tikshna to a degree, where I personally I consider those players to be under the CSK kind of umbrella and probably more looked after by CSK in terms of the health, the nutrition, and all that side of it than they are by SLC. That's not a slight on SLC. I think that's just the reality of the economics of the situation.
That's brilliantly put. If I'm just adding a little note on that last point, I think one thing that a lot of us observe is that our players will follow the SLC kind of strength and conditioning guidelines, their programs, but as soon as the season's over, they're on to their own personal coaches and different trainers. And my concern is not at all a jab to these trainers. They're all very qualified, very experienced people. But my only issue is when you're jumping from different programs like that, there is no consistency. I think one thing that's the foundation of a good strength and conditioning program is a consistent approach that works towards one goal, and it's backed by data day in, day out. As much as experienced as these coaches are, personal coaches are, they won't have that match time analysis of what a player is. They won't have the accurate idea of how many miles they're doing in a game, how intense they're going. So it's very difficult for them to all the time kind of craft those perfect programs. I'd like to see, maybe perhaps a longer, more involved approach to setting programs. But I'd also like to bring us to the final question of the episode.
Harry, can I just add
sure.
something to that? I think that firstly, a lot of the issues we're seeing at the World Cup at the moment is because SLC have dropped those fitness standards that Mickey Arthur brought in. And I say this as a man who loves a kotiwati and a mutton roll, but the boys need to be strict on themselves, right? They're professional cricketers, okay? They're professional sportsmen, and they need to understand that their job is to put themselves in the best physical shape they can be in when they step out of the field. The idea that we have players who've decided they can't play ODI cricket and need to focus on T20 cricket, and we're led to believe, or we're the kind of the chat around it, even though they never said it, is essentially because they don't want to get fit enough to play 50 overs, is absolutely ridiculous. Right? That it's just to me, it's just incredible that they let it slip. I mean, I understand that the fat test or the skin fold test really doesn't have any bearing on your actual personal health and fitness. But what it does show, and why I think it's important, is it shows the standard, right? Playing for Sri Lanka is an absolute honour. It's the biggest honour you'll ever have in your life, and it doesn't matter if that's at A-team level, emerging level, under 18s, under 16s, or like an under 60s, over 60s tournament where they've sent the team to Australia, whatever. If you ever get that opportunity in any sport or in anything in life to represent your country, it's an absolute unbelievable honour. And if you're given that opportunity, you should try and maintain the highest standards you can possibly have. And we've had Sri Lankan players really, go beyond elite and really set the standards. If you look at how any cricket fan in the world talks about Mahela and Sangha, and it's because those two players in particular just had such high standards for themselves, right? Absolutely high standards. They left that dressing room in a much better place when they left than it was when they walked in. And it doesn't matter if you might be a 19-year-old just walking out of school into the change room, you've got to still think like that. That is the level that if Sri Lanka are going to be world beaters, and we know we can be because we have been in the past, which means we can get back there again, that is the standard that you've got to have. And I think it's a real shame that we've let those standards slip in a way, right? And I think I'd love to see them go back to it. I think that fits into what you're talking about with the players and their programs as well. And the other thing I should add to this is, I talked about the franchise. So I'm getting all riled up here now. I talked about all the franchise owners. You think you're going to turn up at RCB or any of the IPL teams and not fail a fitness test, and they're going to play you? They're not. They're going to send you back home. Cricket is very quickly. Mel talked about Cricket 2.0, that book. Cricket is moving rapidly. The tactics of it, the professionalism of it is moving rapidly. Stuff that was acceptable 10 years ago, 15 years ago to do is not acceptable now. You've got to be trying to figure out any which way that you can find an edge. We talked about innovation. The most basic thing for any sportsman. Sorry, I feel like I'm having a go at you, and I'm not. The most basic standard is get fit, stay fit, maintain fit. Think about every single thing you put in your body. Are you drinking enough water the night before? Have you got enough sleep? Those are things that you don't need. That are absolutely controllable. You shouldn't need anyone to tell you about. Those are things that you could just wake up every morning and do, right? That's, for me, that is the most basic thing, and it just shows respect. If you've got respect for the jersey, then you do all that. That's what I think. Sorry, I'll let you go.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. Couldn't have said it better. And with that, I'd like to bring us towards the final question of the show. We're 3 games in our campaign, and unfortunately, a semi-final spot seems very distant, very remote right now. Even though we want to cling on to that last bit of hope, realistically, there's a very low chance. But what this does give us is an opportunity to do what exactly we want with the rest of our games. They are a clean slate for us to go out there and execute different ideas, strategies, and try out new things. With that being said, right, what is the approach and what are the tactics we think Sri Lanka should employ the rest of this campaign to kind of make the best use of it? It's a high level competition. You have teams doing their best to each game. So I think Sri Lanka, we should as a unit take advantage of this, and there are certain things we can do. So I'd like to pose the question to you guys, and before I move on to y'all, I just like to point a few ideas that I have. I think for me personally, it's trying different players in different roles. I think we briefly touched upon this here and there throughout the episode, but trying different players in different capacities than we're used to seeing them, because I think the opportunity to test them against high level opposition is not going to present itself too often. So I think experimenting, trying different bowling setups, trying different batting combinations, giving different roles to people, I think that's one thing we can do. And one other thing I'd like to see is our players being more involved in leadership. And what I mean is not just the captain, but the other senior players, and not even senior players, but players who feel like, okay, they have something to contribute. Because leadership, it's not just about the title you have, it's about the initiatives you take on the field. It's about putting up your hand in the tough times, pointing out ideas to your captain. I think going back to the Asia Cup that concluded recently in Sri Lanka, one thing that was really interesting to see with the Indian side is, despite Rohit being the captain and taking the shots, the other players did rally up and they were taking leadership roles. You would see Virat Kohli walk up to Rohit Sharma and discuss ideas and then him take control for the next over or two. I'd like to see us employ those kind of tactics, that kind of mindset. I think when you build an entire 11 group of 11 players of leaders, I think that, just makes the captain's job so much easier and makes miracles possible. I'd like to move on to the rest of you guys. Mark, if you'd like to kick us off as well.
Oh, do you know what? Right, I actually think I think the intent or the ideas that we're going onto the field with are not bad. I think the problem has been poor execution. Right. I mean, you could have the greatest coaches in the world. You could have you can give them all the resources you want, and then if your number 6 sweeps the ball into his own wicket, there's absolutely nothing you can do, is there? I think it's difficult because we talked a lot about wanting to see a team that show the right intent, and in a way, Sri Lanka show the right intent. And I think the easy thing to say would be like, I just want to see us bat 50 overs, and have a decent run rate. I just want us to. I got in the last episode of Muralian that we did a couple of days ago. I think I was uncharacteristically kind of angry with the team, because it just feels to me is that I still feel, I talked about earlier about Sri Lanka being an established cricket nation. I still think though, to a lot of people who watch cricket, Sri Lanka, particularly in England and Australia, Sri Lanka is still a bit of a novelty act, even though Sri Lankan white ball teams are much more successful than England, and it really upsets me when we go to major tournaments and we don't put in a good shift. I'd like to. Firstly, I think the team we should be targeting to win against is England. Right, that should be the big game. They're kind of on the ropes a little bit. England in 50 over World Cups, Sri Lanka have a much more favourable record against England than England have against us. I think if lay that marker down and just add up to the sum of our parts, because at the moment we're not doing that. Normally as well, you find when a team starts to play into the sum of their parts, 11 equals 12. They suddenly get a little bit of magic from here or there. Suddenly the fielding just gets a little bit slicker. Suddenly someone's able to conjure up a run out from nothing. And I just think that if every, I don't want to say it's effort, because I don't think it's effort, but I think I'd like to see the right combination of the fire in the belly and the ice in the head. Like, go out there with the correct amount of fire, but have your brain engaged and make the right decisions in those pressure situations, and really put a team under pressure and take the games deep, and then hopefully knock a couple of wins off. And look, we've lost the first 3 games. It'll be an absolute miracle if we were able to do anything beyond that and get into the semi-finals. But if you've been a Sri Lanka fan over the years, you know that when you put on that blue jersey, that's when miracles happen. Like, there is endless miracles involved associated with this cricket team. The fact we're even a cricket team in itself and we're at the top table in itself is a miracle when you look at everything else that happens in the world of cricket and in and around Sri Lanka, right? So, don't stop believing, and just look, everyone's beaten everyone else. The Netherlands came out and beat South Africa out of nowhere. You never know. Get a couple of wins, you get a bit of momentum behind you. Go beat the Dutch and go beat England, and then suddenly, you never know. Stranger things have happened, right?
Viren, I'll let you have the final word, and I'll just add a small thing. I said this even before the Australia match as well. For me, the most important thing, yes, it will be fantastic if we can get even near the semi-finals. But for me, was to continue almost the identity that Kusal seemed to have forced into the Sri Lankan team with his batting. And I felt like even Sadira Samarikramas, including Kasun Rajitas of the world, were influenced by how well Kusal was batting the other day. So I just want us to at least double down on not necessarily the formula, but the spirit to the game that we have like rekindled with Kusal's betting. And maybe you can do by like just going back to 1996 and watching Sanat just end the career of field defeaters.
Well said, Mo. So I'll wrap this up with my thoughts on this. And this is something I told Merle the other day as well. Regardless of our previous performance, each time our 11 players step out to the field, over 20 million hearts beat in unison. And that has happened even during this so-called rut or period of transition that we've been in. What do I want from the remainder of this campaign? I remember watching my first ever World Cup in 2003 as a 4-year-old when we reached the semi-finals. Basil's hat-trick against Bangladesh, Aravinder's run out against Australia, where Kumar Sangakkara has been chastised since, reaching the finals in 2007, reaching the finals in 2011, reaching the World T20 finals in 2012, winning the World T20 in 2014. From 2003 up until 2014, and I'm also taking the 2009 World T20 final and 2010 World T20 semi-final into account. It seemed as though every single ICC event was meant to have Sri Lanka in the final four. It's unfortunate that I wasn't around for 1996, but ever since then, it's been 2014 that was our crown jewel moment. What has been disappointing for me since, and this might be very controversial, people have tagged this as our period of transition. I don't think this is a period of transition. I think this has been a rut with collective and individual moments of brilliance every now and then. I look back to our victory against England in 2019 that Harry spoke about earlier. I look back to that victory against India in 2017. Merle and I speak about Asela Gunaratne's lap sweep of Jasprit Bumrah for 6 in England. Those were moments of brilliance that took us over the line. But what has been disappointing for me is having seen other teams having periods of transition. Australia after Ricky Ponting, Matthew Hayden, Adam Gilchrist, Shane Warne, all called it a day. India after the likes of Rahul Dravid, Sachin, Lakshman, all called it a day as well. They had periods of transition, but they had a revamped brand of cricket. And that is why it was a period of transition and not a rut, because they had an end goal. At the end of the storm, there was a golden sky, in the words of "You'll Never Walk Alone." Right? We saw the silver lining at the end of the storm. But for us, as Sri Lankan fans, this storm has been going on for far too long. It's been a good 8-9 years where we've questioned what our style of play is. I bring back what Mark said earlier with Mickey Arthur. I loved Mickey Arthur's coaching philosophy. During the LPL, during his commentary stints, he spoke about how he promoted Hasaranga up the order. Mark brought up Hasaranga's Asia Cup final knock. I'll bring back another knock of note, and that was the knock against Ireland in the qualifying rounds of the 2021 World T20, where we were precariously placed at 7 for 3, and Hasaranga and Pathum Nissanka notched up an 80/90 run partnership that got us to a formidable total. What I want to say, and I said this the other day, I referred to Charles Dickens and said this was a tale of two Kusals, post-Durham Gate. I want to see the 2.0 version of the remaining 14 players in the squad. I want to see Dushan Hemanta, the batsman/bowler, and not just Dushan Hemanta being Jonty Rhodes. I want to see Dhananjay De Silva finding the middle of his bat again with some confidence, with some intent. I want to see Kusal Janit Pereira settling in and playing a knock where I don't think it's imminent that he's going to get out of the next delivery. And it's quite strange that that's the exact way I felt when Russell Larner said Kusal Janit enters the party. I knew I knew a commentator's curse was going to fall upon KJP then. I want to see Kusal Mendis as a captain take this opportunity to reinvent the way Sri Lanka plays. If Morgan could do it for England, if MS Dhoni could do it in very trying conditions in 2007 after that embarrassing exit in the group stage, if Michael Clarke could do it once Ricky Ponting called it a day, if Graham Smith could do it after Hansi Cronje's departure, Kusal Mendis should take this as an opportunity to mark his legacy as a Sri Lankan captain / a future Sri Lankan captain as well by trying to create a style of play that we can stick with. As a Sri Lankan fan, that's all I can ask for. As Mark said, for them to sport our jerseys, wear it with pride, and give us a performance of note. I don't care about the end result. You win some, you lose some. But actually show some spirit, actually show some fight, and break that glass ceiling or that overly conservative glass ceiling that we've set ourselves. On that note, Mark, I know we've run overboard by a good 24, 25 minutes, but if Star Sports can ramble about India, if Sky Sports can go on about England, we as Sri Lankan cricket fans can have this extra leeway when it comes to talking about Sri Lanka cricket. Mark, it was an absolute honor and privilege to have you here. I want to tell you this, I don't think I've mentioned this earlier. You were an inspiration for us to get this up and running again. When I had my first show, The Cricket Analyst, alongside Zora, Hari, and a few others, we notched up over 2,000 subscribers, but unfortunately, we lost a member of our team quite tragically, and that was it on that program. And it was tough thinking of kind of bringing this back because I didn't think we'd have the same kind of curve back to where we were. But thank you for merely just appearing on our show, because that has helped us.
Oh, lads, any time. Look, we're all like here for the same thing. All we ever want to see is Sri Lankan cricket. I don't even say win stuff. I just want to say put a good fist of it, and play to its full potential. I just think Sri Lankan cricket gives so much joy to so many people. I've been with Sri Lankan fans in Australia and Canada and obviously in Sri Lanka as well, and in the UK. And I think it's an incredible thing. I think if you're listening to this and you don't have a podcast, or you're not on Twitter, or I don't know how you would have found it if you're not on social media. But if you want to just get involved, I think come and have your say. The more voices, the better. I think there needs to be, again, have some personal standards and don't just slag the players off. It's a bit of a shame that Sri Lankans are quite often, when it comes to talking about cricket and social media, there's a couple of people who've let Sri Lanka down. Don't be one of those people. Be positive. Add more to it. Get involved with these podcasts. I love them. I'm sitting there watching them and talking about it. Join the debate. Support everyone you can. Just rise up. We're creating these conversations. You never know who's watching them. You never know who's seeing them. You never know. Maybe somebody might be, instead of looking after his 36 dogs, might be listening to this and go, do you know what? I'm going to put down the crisps and I'm going to go for a jog and I'm going to take up playing ODI cricket. You never know. Stranger things have happened, right? So thanks for having me on the show. It's a great honor. I'm glad you guys have got this going. I'll be, doing everything I can to help you guys get the word out and get out there and, get subscribed and subscribe to this, subscribe to Murali and subscribe to everything. Support your other Sri Lankan cricket content creators, right?
Thank you very much, Mark, and we look forward to having a Mark's End on this show very, very soon as well. Taking a leaf out of Rally Around the West Indies, echoing Mark's words, rally around Sri Lanka, let's rally around this team, and let's bring them home. Cheers, guys.